It was a chilly dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307, and the balance of power in France was about to shift drastically. King Philip IV's agents were fanning out across France, poised to arrest every Knight Templar they could find in a single stunning sweep. In Paris, officials crashed through the doors of the Templar headquarters only to discover, to their astonishment, that the vaults were empty. The famed treasure of the order had vanished. And far to the west, at the coastal city of La Rochelle, legend claims the king's men arrived at the docks to a similarly baffling scene. If the legends are to be believed, the Templars' ships that once bobbed in their Atlantic harbor had slipped away, leaving nothing behind, and officially never to be seen again. Thus was born the enduring mystery of the lost Templar fleet of La Rochelle. Was there really a secret armada laden with knights and treasure? Or, as some have suggested, was this supposed historical event more fable than fact? Long before becoming the stuff of legend, La Rochelle was a practical asset for the Knights Templar. This Atlantic seaport in western France had been a major Templar base since at least the 12th century. The order received privileges in La Rochelle and helped transform the sleepy harbor into a bustling hub of trade. By the late 1200s, La Rochelle was effectively the Templars' chief Atlantic port, a counterpart to their ports in the Mediterranean. It was here that the knights stationed what they considered their main fleet of ships, though one should picture this fleet in context. Unlike a king's navy of dozens of ships, the Templars' Atlantic fleet was a relatively modest collection, mostly used for commerce and transport rather than direct conflict. Historical records show that Templar ships at La Rochelle were primarily engaged in trade, especially the lucrative wine trade. The order owned vineyards and produced wine in the region, and their ships ferried barrel upon barrel to markets in England and beyond. In other words, these weren't armadas bristling with knights in shining armor, but likely ordinary medieval merchant vessels tasked with hauling goods. While the Templars did have ships more suited for conflict, these were located with their Mediterranean assets. The Templars, being astute businessmen in addition to warriors, often rented additional ships as needed for their transport activities. Owning a huge permanent fleet would have been impractical, so they kept only a few ships on hand and hired others for bigger jobs. By all accounts, the fleet at La Rochelle was limited and utilitarian, not a mighty secret navy. This point becomes crucial when judging tales of a grand disappearance. The stage for the fleet's disappearance was set by the infamous events of October 1307. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Knights Templar and eyeing their assets, had resolved to destroy the order. Under the cloak of secrecy, Philip issued sealed orders to his officials across France to be opened and executed on the same day, Friday the 13th. At dawn that day, the roundup began. Templar brothers were arrested en masse, their commanderies raided, and their property seized. In Paris, the Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay was taken into custody. Yet, intriguingly, no vast treasures were found. Philip's men searched the Paris temple treasury and found it virtually empty, fueling later speculation that someone had warned the Templars in time for them to move their wealth. It's within this drama that the legend of La Rochelle's fleet takes root. According to later accounts, the Templars managed a last-minute escape at La Rochelle. The story goes that as Philip's net closed around them, carts laden with chests of gold slipped out of Paris in the dark, racing toward La Rochelle. There at the port, Templar ships awaited under cover of night. Just hours or days before the king's officers arrived, a fleet of numerous ships allegedly set sail from La Rochelle, carrying fleeing knights and a fortune in treasure. When the royal arrest team finally reached La Rochelle's harbor, the docks were empty of Templar vessels, and the order's ships had vanished into the Atlantic mist, destination unknown. The contemporary evidence for this escape is both scant and ambiguous. In the trials of the Templars that followed, one piece of testimony stands out. A Templar named Jean de Chalon claimed he heard it said that the Paris preceptor, Gérard de Villiers, fled with 50 horses and 18 galleys. This hearsay account, a second-hand rumor from a prisoner who, to put it mildly, wasn't treated well, is the only medieval reference to Templar ships escaping arrest. It's from here that the entire saga of a missing fleet seems to spring. Notably, Jean de Chalon didn't claim to witness the ships departing. He merely recounted a rumor circulating in the chaos of 1307. Assuming for a moment that some Templar ships did put to sea from La Rochelle ahead of the arrests, where could they have gone? Here the line between history and legend blurs even further, and theories are all over the place. Some of them are theoretically plausible, while others are outright fantastical, and tend to involve a certain island that the History Channel has made a meal out of for the last decade. But I'll get to all the ideas shortly. First, let's start with perhaps the most common idea, that the fugitive Templars headed north to safety. Scotland is frequently mentioned as a destination, since in 1307 Scotland was ruled by Robert the Bruce, who was outside King Philip's reach. Notably, he was also formally outside of the reach of the papacy as well. King Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated, and unlike many of the excommunications of the time, this wasn't for some arcane political reason. If the accounts are to be believed, he lured a baron to the church, where the baron presumed he would be safe, and that's when Robert finished him off. Later legend claims that Templars fought alongside the Scots at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, and that the treasure was used to fund Robert the Bruce's campaigns. This romantic notion of Templars in Scotland has inspired many a book and film, though hard evidence is lacking. It's conceivable a handful of Templars found asylum there, but the idea of a large Templar fleet unloading tons of gold on Scottish shores remains unproven folklore. That's not to say that it's definitely not true, but that we simply don't have the evidence. Another theory points to the Iberian Peninsula. Several Templar ships might have sailed to Castile, Portugal, or Aragon, where the persecution was less severe and sympathetic rulers could offer protection. In Portugal, for example, King Denis later absorbed the Templars into a new order, the Order of Christ, allowing the knights to continue quietly. Some speculate that any escaping Templar vessels could have headed to Portuguese ports, contributing their manpower and assets to the rebranded Templar successors there. This route has a ring of real possibility. Historically, many Portuguese Templars indeed survived by becoming Knights of Christ, and Portugal had a strong naval tradition. However, once again, there's no record of a treasure-laden convoy arriving in Lisbon or elsewhere, so it remains conjecture. That said, of course, secret convoys are generally kept secret and not recorded in any official records. The legend doesn't stop at Europe. In its most colorful form, the Templar fleet sails across the Atlantic Ocean, embarking on a transoceanic odyssey decades before Columbus. This fringe theory suggests the knights took their hidden treasure to the New World. There, on Oak Island in Nova Scotia or some other secret location, they supposedly buried the Templar treasure for safekeeping. If this sounds like the plot of an adventure novel or a Hollywood movie, that's because it essentially is. The 2004 film National Treasure, starring Nicolas Cage, even includes a significant nod to the idea of Templar treasure hidden in the New World. Finally, some down-to-earth researchers have proposed a far less exotic fate. Perhaps the Templar ships didn't make it far at all. The English Channel and the area surrounding it can be perilous waters. A few heavily laden ships fleeing in haste might have been wrecked in a storm, their secret cargo lost to the depths. It's an unromantic end, but not an implausible one. Medieval ships were at the mercy of weather, and a sudden gale could have sent the order's escapees to a watery grave, unbeknownst to anyone on shore. Again, though, there's no hard evidence to say this occurred, only conjecture based upon rapid flight in overloaded boats. When we strip away the legend and scrutinize the facts, what picture emerges of the Templar fleet at La Rochelle and its supposed disappearance? First, it's clear that the Templars did use La Rochelle as a maritime base, but their naval resources were limited. The order at the time of its suppression probably had no more than a handful of galleys in total, and those were built for the Mediterranean, not for Atlantic exploration. The ships operating out of La Rochelle were likely coastal traders, with their more significant naval assets in the Mediterranean itself. They were small and suitable for ferrying goods through relatively calm waters. Crucially, such ships were ill-suited to long ocean voyages. They couldn't carry enough provisions or withstand the ferocious winds and waves of the open Atlantic. This makes the idea of a Templar fleet immediately sailing to Scotland, across the rough Irish Sea, or especially to North America, extremely doubtful from a naval standpoint. Secondly, consider the documentation. King Philip's confiscators kept detailed records of the property seized from the Templars, including all records of the inventories kept by the Templars themselves. Nowhere in the surviving records is there an inventory of a significant fleet of Templar ships at La Rochelle. That said, they could have been rented ships, or ships that were kept off the record as things heated up in France. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as the saying goes, but it does raise eyebrows. Notably, if a large fleet had been present and then gone missing overnight, one would expect it to be noted in correspondence at the time. Instead, the historical silence on this matter suggests that if any Templar ships departed, it was not a large-scale evacuation, but perhaps one or two ships quietly slipping away. It might even be that no ships were in port at that moment, and the Templars could have already dispatched them on routine runs. Thus, they could have unintentionally foiled Philip's plans, simply because there were no vessels docked to seize. In short, the dramatic disappearance may have been nothing more than the normal movement of a very small number of vessels. Under this theory, the Templars would have simply never returned their ships to their French base, and the ships may have found their way into the service of merchants. Finally, we have the perspective of modern scholarship on the fate of the Templars' wealth and personnel. No credible historical source from the 14th century describes a Templar convoy escaping France with vast riches. The first mentions of the lost fleet and treasure surface much later, as part of Templar myths and theories that blossomed over the centuries. In academic circles, the consensus is that while some Templars may have evaded capture and some assets were spirited away, there was no grand, coordinated seaborne evacuation. The consensus is that the mystery of the missing fleet is, in effect, a later invention, a legend that endures because it's an undeniably compelling tale. In the end, the tale of the lost Templar fleet at La Rochelle reminds us how history and myth can intertwine. It's easy to see why this story refuses to go away. It's equal parts tragedy and adventure, with a tantalizing question mark that invites us to fill in the blanks. We may never know exactly what happened to any Templar ships that left La Rochelle in 1307, but we also can't say for certain that there were even any that left in an escape. Our one source on the matter is inherently unreliable, as we can only imagine what horrors the Templar who confessed to hearing about the La Rochelle transport had to endure. It's also important to remember, too, that many of these captured Templars would basically confess to anything the Inquisitors wanted to hear. And since the Inquisitors wanted to hear proof of the misdeeds of the Order, a story of a vast treasury being moved out of the country, potentially to a rival nation, may have fit that bill. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, don't forget to check out my other channels by clicking the links in the description below. Legend says that on quiet Baltic mornings, faint church bells echo from beneath the waves. These are the bells of Vineta, a fabled city of unmatched wealth that vanished beneath the sea. Often dubbed the Atlantis of the Baltic, Vineta was said to be a magnificent port metropolis overflowing with riches. Surprisingly, however, modern research has found ample evidence to suggest that this was actually based upon a real trade city that once existed in the region. Stories describe its churches with golden bells and windows studded with jewels, and markets where nothing rare or desirable was missing. But this prosperity bred arrogance and sin. According to the traditional tale, the people of Vineta grew morally corrupt and boastful, defying divine law with their decadent lifestyle. In punishment, a great flood or tempest struck in a single day, dragging the entire city to the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Folklore also adds an additional eerie detail to Vineta's fate. Some say that on Midsummer Night, once every century, the lost city rises from the sea for a short time. Historians and archaeologists have scoured records and coastlines for clues. Interestingly, medieval chronicles do mention a great city in the same region, suggesting that Vineta's story drew on memories of a genuine place. In the 11th century, Adam of Bremen wrote of a wealthy Slavic trading emporium on an island in the Oder River's Baltic outlet, where merchants from many nations gathered. A century earlier, a traveler by the name of Ibrahim ibn Yaqub described a large city on the Baltic coast as the greatest of all European cities, boasting 12 gates and busy markets. These accounts likely refer to the same settlement, a real medieval port whose grandeur could have inspired the legend of Vineta. Over time, scholars have proposed different locations for this lost city. One long-standing theory placed Vineta off the coast of Usedom, near Kosorov, today on the German side of the Baltic. By the 16th century, people in that area believed a sunken city lay offshore. Crowds would even gather by the beach at Kosorov, straining to hear the submerged bells of Vineta ringing from beneath the waves. However, modern archaeological surveys have found no trace of a drowned medieval city on Usedom's coast. Without any physical evidence, the Kosorov location for Vineta is now regarded as folklore rather than fact. Another hypothesis, popular on old maps, placed Vineta near the tiny island of Ruden. This idea arose after a massive coastal flood in 1306 changed the shape of the shoreline there, sparking tales of land, and perhaps ruins of a city, lost to the sea. Like the Kosorov tale, however, the Ruden story is now considered a later legend, since again, no evidence has been found to support such a city on this now tiny island. By contrast, the strongest historical evidence points to Volin, a large island at the Oder estuary, now in northwestern Poland, as the true basis for Vineta. Volin was known in medieval texts by names like Julin, and some suggest it was even the legendary Viking base of Jomsborg. Further, it fits the geographical description of Adam of Bremen's wealthy port in the exact same region. This theory gained dramatic support from archaeology. Beginning in the 1930s, excavations in and around the modern town of Volin uncovered the remains of a vast 9th to 12th century settlement. Archaeologists found fortifications, workshops, imported luxury goods, and a network of harbor installations. These facts all indicated that Volin was indeed a major Baltic trading center in the early Middle Ages. The town reportedly stretched for several miles along the shore and housed thousands of inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in northern Europe at its peak. Importantly, Volin's historical trajectory aligns with Vineta's legendary rise and fall. The real Volin prospered until the 11th century, when it suffered destruction at the hands of Danish invaders and subsequently declined. After about 1200, the once great port of Volin had largely collapsed, effectively lost until its ruins were studied centuries later. This makes Volin the leading contender for the factual core of the Vineta legend. The basis of the Vineta myth may have been invented by contemporaries who struggled to explain the desolation of this once grand trading metropolis on the Baltic Sea. Under this theory, over time, additional elements were added to the story, combining then-current religious sensibilities with the mythology of Atlantis. Further, some historians have proposed that there may be a connection between the name Vineta and the name Volin. Notably, the names do appear quite similar, which is another factor that has led to this belief. In scholarly opinion today, Vineta is best understood as a later legendary name for the historical early medieval city at Volin. While the story of Vineta's destruction is taken to be a myth, it definitely appears to have a strong basis in historical reality. Vineta's enduring appeal comes from the interplay between its mythic allure and historical grounding. As legend, it is a dramatic parable about hubris, a splendid city cursed and submerged for its people's sins, with only ghostly bells and rare reappearances to remind the world of its fate. In the end, the lost city of Vineta lives on in two forms. One is the enchanting legend, a sunken Baltic Atlantis that fires the imagination and warns of the perils of unchecked pride. The other is the historical investigation, the careful gathering of clues about medieval trade centers, floods, and conquests along the Baltic coast. The true story behind Vineta may never be fully confirmed until some unmistakable ruins are found, but the process of exploring the truth is part of the fascination with this mystery. In an ornate Viennese palace in 1770, gasps echoed through the royal court as a mysterious turban-clad automaton made its opening chess move against a human challenger. The life-sized mechanical figure, styled as a sorcerer in luxurious Ottoman robes, sat behind a wooden cabinet topped with a chessboard. With a whir of clockwork, the automaton's wooden hand lifted a pawn and advanced it across the board, seemingly thinking for itself. This uncanny machine would go on to defeat eminent figures of the age, even legends like Benjamin Franklin and Napoleon Bonaparte. For over 80 years, this contraption toured Europe and America, astonishing audiences as the world's first chess-playing robot. Yet behind the awe and applause lay one of history's most elaborate hoaxes. This is the story of the mystery of the Mechanical Turk, what it was, who built it, what it did, and how it fooled the world. But before we go on, this machine was no ordinary fraud, and as it turns out, it would directly inspire the creation of the first mechanical computer and lead to the information age. The Mechanical Turk was a fake chess-playing machine that captivated the public from the late 18th century into the mid-19th century. At first glance, it appeared to be an ingenious automaton capable of autonomously playing games of chess against human opponents. The machine consisted of a life-sized model of a man with a wax face, black beard, and gray eyes, dressed in rich Turkish garments, including a turban and robes. Seated at a large wooden cabinet about 3.5 feet long, the figure had one hand resting on the cabinet and the other holding a long pipe when idle. On top of the cabinet was a standard chessboard, and a drawer in the cabinet could be opened to reveal an elegant ivory chess set ready for play. To begin exhibitions, the presenter would dramatically open various doors on the cabinet, revealing an intricate maze of gears and clockwork inside. This was a piece of showmanship, as if to prove no person could hide within. After closing the panels and ostensibly winding a key, the automaton would come to life. Its head swiveled side to side, surveying the board, and its clockwork arm reached out to move chess pieces with surprising dexterity. The effect was eerily convincing. To spectators in an age before computers, the Mechanical Turk truly looked like a thinking machine playing chess. Despite its convincing performance, the Turk was in fact a mechanical illusion, a cleverly designed cabinet that concealed a human chess master operating the machinery. To observers, it seemed like pure clockwork genius, but hidden within its wooden cabinet was a secret compartment where a person would hide to guide the automaton's moves. The elaborate interior was engineered to mislead onlookers. Opening one side of the cabinet showed dense gears. Opening another revealed an empty space, all to suggest the machine's insides were fully visible and free of trickery. Through levers and a pegboard-like apparatus, the concealed operator could see the moves on a small internal chessboard. The operator could then control the Turk's arm to mirror moves on the external board. This deception was maintained in absolute secrecy for decades. To the world, the Mechanical Turk seemed an automaton savant, an early robotic marvel, when in truth it was a masterful magic trick in the guise of scientific innovation. The Mechanical Turk was the brainchild of Wolfgang von Kempelen, a Hungarian-born inventor and engineer at the Habsburg court. The story of its origin is nearly as intriguing as the machine itself. It began in 1769 when Kempelen attended a magic show at the court of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. Unimpressed by one illusionist's performance, Kempelen boldly proclaimed to the Empress that he could create a spectacle far more wondrous. Little did this unknown illusionist know, he had kicked off one of the most fascinating butterfly effects in history, but I'll come back to that shortly. Taking her up on the challenge, and given 6 months to deliver, Kempelen returned in 1770 with his astonishing chess-playing automaton. Officially called the automaton chess player at first, this invention was quickly nicknamed the Turk due to its appearance. Kempelen's initial demonstration for Maria Theresa was a sensation. In the Grand Hall of Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace, he unveiled the automaton and invited courtiers to play against it. Kempelen opened the cabinet doors to display whirring clockwork, then wound up the machine and commenced a chess match. The automaton not only made legal moves, but did so decisively and cleverly. It won game after game against all challengers in the court, leaving the Empress and her guests astonished. By all appearances, Kempelen had delivered on his promise to outshine the previous magician's tricks. He had produced a lifelike machine that seemingly thought on its own, capturing the Enlightenment era's fascination with automatons and intellectual curiosities. However, Kempelen himself was not initially keen on a career as a showman. An accomplished civil servant and inventor, as well as a nobleman, Kempelen regarded the Turk as a novelty rather than his life's work. After the initial buzz of the 1770 demonstration, he dismantled and stored the machine, treating it almost like a party trick that had served its purpose. It wasn't until years later, after Maria Theresa's death, that the Hungarian nobleman was pressed to resurrect his automaton. Her son, Emperor Joseph II, had heard whispers of the marvelous chess machine and requested that it be brought back to entertain visiting dignitaries. Complying with the emperor's wish, Kempelen refurbished the Mechanical Turk and embarked on a tour of Europe in the 1780s, reluctantly stepping into the role of an itinerant showman. Once on tour, the Mechanical Turk proved an enduring crowd puller. It traveled through Europe, leaving a trail of defeated challengers and amazed audiences. In 1783, Kempelen took the automaton to Paris, and created a stir among the French intelligentsia. It was here that one of America's founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, sat down across from the inscrutable automaton. Franklin, an avid chess enthusiast, was serving as the American ambassador in France at the time. The statesman was reportedly enthralled by the automaton's prowess as it cleaned up against him on the chessboard. Not long after, the world's strongest chess player of the period, François-André Philidor, also challenged the Mechanical Turk. Philidor managed to defeat the machine in a celebrated 1793 match in Paris, but even he declared the contest one of the most difficult games he had ever played. The fact that the automaton could give a grandmaster of Philidor's caliber a run for his money only heightened the Turk's mystique. Over the ensuing decades, the Mechanical Turk's reputation grew as it continued to engage in high-profile games. It toured the courts and cities of England, Germany, and beyond, often vanquishing local chess champions. Wherever it went, newspapers and patrons heralded it as an infallible machine or a wonder of artificial reason. Perhaps the most famous encounter took place in 1809, when Napoleon Bonaparte, by then Emperor of the French, arranged a match against the Turk in Schönbrunn Palace. The match with Napoleon has become legendary. As an intrigued Napoleon sat to play, he attempted to test the automaton's limits and perhaps cheat a little. In their game, Napoleon deliberately made an illegal move early on, placing his piece in a way not allowed by chess rules. The Mechanical Turk, seemingly unperturbed, responded by calmly returning Napoleon's piece to its original position, refusing to accept the illegal move. Amused, the emperor tried a second illegal move. This time, the automaton grabbed Napoleon's piece and removed it from the board entirely. When Napoleon attempted a third mischief move, the Turk dramatically swept its arm across the board, knocking all the pieces to the floor in a show of mechanical irritation. Napoleon laughed in surprise at the machine's assertive personality. He then played a fair game and, after 19 moves against the relentless automaton, tipped over his king to concede defeat. This colorful anecdote, whether embellished over time or not, encapsulates the Turk's almost theatrical appeal. The machine was more than a mere sideshow curiosity. It had become a celebrity in its own right, mingling with the most powerful figures of the age and often humbling them at chess. By the early 19th century, the Turk's fame had spread across continents. After Wolfgang von Kempelen died in 1804, ownership of the automaton passed to a Bavarian musician and showman named Johann Malzel. Malzel, an entrepreneur known for inventing the metronome and other devices, saw great commercial potential in the chess automaton. He took the Mechanical Turk on extensive new tours, first around Europe and later to the United States, drawing large crowds and charging admission to witness the marvel. Under Malzel's management, the Turk continued to notch victories. In 1826, Malzel brought the automaton to New York, introducing it to American audiences who were equally spellbound by a machine that could outthink the human mind. The tour across the U.S. was a hit with exhibitions in major cities. Newspapers eagerly reported on the automaton's games, and some skeptics issued playful challenges or threats to expose its secret. Notably, during the Turk's American tour, the famous author Edgar Allan Poe saw it in Richmond and became fascinated. Poe penned an essay in 1836 titled Malzel's Chess Player, in which he analyzed the machine's operation and cleverly deduced that a human must be hiding inside. From the very beginning, astute observers struggled to explain how the Mechanical Turk could possibly play chess so well. Enlightenment Europe was familiar with impressive clockwork automata, but a machine that could handle a complex intellectual game in real time seemed almost unbelievable. Over the years, A lively debate raged in print and parlors over the Turk's true nature. Many theories were proposed, some insightful, others wildly imaginative. Perhaps one of the most far-fetched ideas is that a trained monkey was operating the Mechanical Turk. Interestingly, a trained monkey that could beat chess masters might be one of the few things that would be more interesting than a robot that can do it. But maybe I'm just saying that because I live in a time when my grandma's ancient iPhone can beat Magnus Carlsen, and as far as I know, we're still waiting on a chess-playing monkey. In reality, the hoax was simpler than most wild theories. The Mechanical Turk always had a human chess player hidden inside its cabinet. Kemplin's genius was in designing the cabinet with sliding panels, false backs, and removable parts, so that he could open every door to the audience without revealing the occupant. Kemplin showed the internal gears on one side. The operator would quietly shift into another compartment, often behind a panel or tucked into a corner behind props. Then, when the doors were shut and the game commenced, the operator would slide into position beneath the chessboard. Inside the dim cabinet, the hidden chess expert used a miniature chessboard to mirror the external game. The operator would control the Turk's arm via levers, cranks, or a pantograph-like mechanism connected to the Turk figure above. A candle or oil lamp inside provided the necessary light, with its smoke vented cleverly through the Turk figure's turban, disguised by incense or other smoke in the room. The Turk's machinery did include real clockwork, but these mechanisms were primarily there to sell the illusion. The true brain of the automaton was always a human mind, guiding every move from its concealed cockpit. Kempelin and his successors went to great lengths to keep the secret. The operators were sworn to silence, and they entered and exited the cabinet away from public view. Historians later identified several of the Turks' secret operators, though most of them remain unknown. This has led to all sorts of theories about who many of the operators could be, with some suggesting that great figures of the era may have wanted to play an anonymous game of chess. This leads to the rather unusual mental image of, let's say, Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia, stuffing himself inside the machine for some incognito chess. While the idea may sound far-fetched, the idea that someone with such an aura would want to play anonymously isn't a crazy idea. After all, no one was pulling their punches against the Mechanical Turk. Everyone wanted to prove they could beat the machine. Others have suggested that at least one of the operators may have been a woman who wanted the opportunity to play chess with powerful male figures of the time. In the 18th century, women did occasionally play chess with men, but it was relatively rare and often limited by social conventions, especially in public or competitive settings. Further, there were a number of women, especially in Paris, who played chess at a high level, but their play was generally limited to matches between other women. Much like the idea of a monarch in the Mechanical Turk, it's an interesting idea, but there's no evidence to confirm it directly. As the 19th century progressed, the Mechanical Turk eventually met a fate as dramatic as its life. In the late 1830s, during a tour of Cuba, the Turk's then operator, William Schlumberger, fell ill and died, leaving Maelzel without his skilled co-player. A few months later, in 1838, Johann Maelzel himself died at sea, while en route back to Europe. The famous automaton was left orphaned, packed among Maelzel's belongings. When the ship returned, a friend of Maelzel took possession of the machine and eventually sold it to Dr. John Mitchell of Philadelphia. He happened to be Edgar Allan Poe's physician and a great fan of the Turk. Mitchell and a group of enthusiasts lovingly restored the now aging automaton and exhibited it a few more times in the early 1840s. By then, however, the novelty had begun to wane. The world was moving on to new wonders, and the Turk started to gather dust. Dr. Mitchell donated it to a museum in Philadelphia for safekeeping, which, to put it rather mildly, would be a mistake. There, the Mechanical Turk sat quietly until tragedy struck. On July 5, 1854, a fire broke out in downtown Philadelphia and swept through the museum, engulfing the Turk. The fabled chess automaton was destroyed by the flames, bringing its 84-year career to an abrupt end. Only some external pieces, like the chessboard, survived, as they had been stored separately. Ironically, it was only after the Turk's destruction that its long-guarded secret was finally revealed to the public. In the aftermath of the fire, Dr. Mitchell's son, Silas Mitchell, felt that with the machine gone, there was no reason to conceal the truth of its operation. He penned a series of detailed articles in the Chess Monthly in 1857, explaining exactly how the Mechanical Turk had been orchestrated by a human operator all along. Other former operators and associates soon chimed in with their recollections, confirming details such as the interior candle and sliding seat. The great chess-playing wonder of a bygone era was unmasked as an elaborate hoax, albeit one of the most ingenious in entertainment history. Yet, calling the Mechanical Turk a mere fraud understates its importance. In truth, this automaton left an outsized legacy in both popular culture and the development of technology. The Turk spurred conversations about artificial intelligence long before that term existed. If a machine could mimic human thought in a strategy game like chess, people wondered what that implied about the boundary between man and machine. It wasn't just lay spectators who were intrigued. Notable inventors and thinkers drew inspiration from the Turk. In 1819, an aspiring English mathematician named Charles Babbage watched the Mechanical Turk play in London. Babbage immediately recognized that the Turk was likely a trick, but the idea of a calculating machine that could truly play chess planted a seed in his mind. He began to imagine mechanical devices that could perform intellectual tasks through genuine computation rather than illusion. Within a few years, Babbage conceived his difference engine and later the more general analytical engine, essentially designing the first mechanical computer. Babbage himself credited the Turk as an early influence that got him pondering whether a machine might actually think mathematically. In this way, the Mechanical Turk, a fake thinking machine, helped kickstart real progress in computing machinery. It's perhaps one of the greatest butterfly effects of all time. An illusionist whose name has been forgotten to history puts on a show that bores the Holy Roman Empress to tears. A Hungarian noble promises to impress said Holy Roman Empress with some content that doesn't suck, to put it in modern terms. The only surefire way to do this is to build a hoax that's so captivating that for almost a century people question whether a collection of gears can really think. Then one of the greatest minds in history sees this machine in action decades after its creation and realizes that it can't do what they claim it's doing. He then realizes that a machine could actually do what the Mechanical Turk claims to do, but that the technology isn't there yet. This madman then devotes the rest of his life to creating machines that can perform calculations. Flash forward to the 21st century, and here you are watching this video on YouTube, all because a forgotten illusionist put on a crappy, boring show for a Holy Roman Empress. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also feel free to check out the YouTube membership or my Patreon page to support my work more directly. The waves of the North Sea crept steadily toward King Canute's throne as he sat on the shore. Courtiers had flattered him that his power was so absolute. Even the ocean tide would halt at his command. Canute knew better, and as the cold water washed over his feet, The Viking king famously demonstrated that no mortal monarch could control the seas. Yet for a brief moment in the 11th century, Canute the Great did command nearly everything around the North Sea. He ruled England, Denmark, Norway, and even swayed parts of Sweden and Scotland, binding these far-flung kingdoms under his crown. Historians later dubbed this realm the North Sea Empire, evoking the image of a great Viking maritime empire. But was Canute's North Sea Empire really an empire in any true sense, or just a fleeting personal union held together by the will of one formidable man? To answer that, we need to dive into what the North Sea Empire was, how it formed, and what modern scholars say about its nature and legacy. The North Sea Empire refers to the personal union of the kingdoms of England, Denmark, and Norway under the rule of Canute the Great in the early 11th century. Rather than a single unified state, it was a collection of separate kingdoms, all governed by one man. Canute didn't proclaim himself a new emperor of a consolidated realm. Instead, he was concurrently King of England, King of Denmark, and King of Norway. Each kingdom retained its own laws and institutions. In essence, it was a sea-centered realm whose parts were connected by the sea routes between them. The very name North Sea Empire is a modern historical construct. Early 20th century historians coined the term to describe Canute's dominion. Contemporary medieval people didn't use that grand title. They simply spoke of the individual kingdoms of England, Denmark, and Norway. So the label North Sea Empire gives an aura of imperial unity to what was, in reality, a personal dynastic union of crowns. Understanding this personal union is key to judging whether it was truly an empire. In a personal union, multiple distinct states share a ruler, but remain politically separate in most other respects. Each kingdom under Canute kept its own nobles, laws, and interests. They weren't merged into one administrative system. This was quite unlike, say, the Roman Empire, or even the Holy Roman Empire at its peak, where a central authority governed diverse lands. Canute's North Sea realm was held together by his personal power and charisma, the loyalty he could command, and the common waterways of the North Sea. With that context in mind, let's explore how this North Sea realm came to be, and how Canute managed to briefly unite these Viking Age kingdoms. The story begins with ambition and opportunism in the Viking Age. Canute's father, Sweyn Forkbeard of Denmark, had long harbored designs on the rich kingdom of England. England had been a target of Viking raids and Danish invasions for decades, and Sweyn himself successfully conquered England in 1013. At that moment, Sweyn briefly ruled over Denmark, Norway, and England, very briefly becoming the first to unite all three thrones. However, Sweyn's triumph was short-lived. He died suddenly in 1014, just weeks after becoming King of England. His nascent North Sea realm splintered on his death. The English nobility restored their ousted king, Ethelred the Unready, and in Scandinavia, Sweyn's elder son, Harold, took the Danish throne while Norway slipped away. The idea of a North Sea-spanning kingdom could have ended there, but Sweyn's younger son, Canute, was not about to let his father's vision die. Canute the Great, as he came to be known, was likely in his early 20s when Sweyn died, and he was already an experienced warrior prince. In 1014, Canute's first attempt to claim England met resistance. By 1015, he led a coalition of Vikings in a renewed invasion of England. England was in chaos. King Ethelred's rule had been weak and plagued by internal strife. After a series of battles, including a fierce clash at the Battle of Ashington in 1016, Canute defeated Ethelred's son, Edmund Ironside. The exhausted rivals struck a treaty to divide the kingdom, Canute taking the north and Edmund the south. But Edmund's sudden death late in 1016 left Canute as undisputed king of all England. On Christmas Day 1016, Canute was crowned in London as King of England, a Viking conqueror on the English throne. While he technically wasn't the first Viking king of England, that accolade goes to his dear old dad. Canute would reign for decades rather than weeks. Having secured England, Canute moved quickly to consolidate power. He eliminated or neutralized English nobles who opposed him and rewarded those who supported him. To strengthen his legitimacy, he married Emma of Normandy, the widow of Ethelred in a savvy political alliance, in 1017. Canute also kept paying the formidable Viking army that brought him victory, using hefty taxes to ensure the loyalty of these fighting men. By 1018, with the kingdom pacified and the Danes and Anglo-Saxons grudgingly united under his rule, Canute was fully recognized as King of England. England, with its wealth and efficient administration, became the crown jewel in Canute's budding North Sea domain. He often ruled from Winchester and relied on experienced Anglo-Saxon advisors, indicating that England was the power base of his empire. Meanwhile, events in Scandinavia soon handed Canute another crown. His older brother, King Harold of Denmark, died without an heir in 1018. Canute, as Sweyn Forkbeard's surviving son, claimed the Danish throne and sailed to Denmark in 1019 to assume kingship. There was little opposition. The Danish nobility accepted Canute, especially given his newfound wealth and the battle-hardened army funded by English treasure. Now Canute was king of both England and Denmark, and as they presumably said at the time, everything's coming up Canute. With Denmark secure and Sweden checked, Canute turned to Norway, the third pillar of the North Sea Triad. Norway at the time was ruled by Olaf II, who was increasingly unpopular with his own nobles. Canute had already tried diplomacy. He offered Olaf the chance to govern Norway as Canute's vassal, which Olaf refused. In 1028, Canute assembled a massive fleet and sailed for Norway. Olaf couldn't face this onslaught. As Canute landed along the Norwegian coast, local chieftains by the fjords yielded and swore loyalty to Canute. In Trondheim, the Norse assembly acclaimed Canute as King of Norway. Olaf fled into exile, and just like that, in 1028, Canute added the crown of Norway to his collection. By 1028, Canute had indeed achieved an empire in scope. England, Denmark, and Norway were all under his rule. In the subsequent years, he would also acquire significant holdings in Scotland and Sweden, and would formally declare himself the king of the latter. By the early 1030s, Canute sat at the top of the North Sea world like a colossus, a northern emperor in all but name. Ruling such an empire was a delicate balancing act. Unlike a centralized empire, Canute's realms were separated by sea and had distinct cultures and traditions. Canute proved to be a shrewd and adaptable ruler. In England, he largely adopted Anglo-Saxon governance traditions. He kept the administrative system intact and even divided England into large earldoms to help govern it. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes Canute's frequent travels abroad, but little domestic strife in England. In Denmark and Norway, Canute ruled more indirectly. England was his primary residence and power base, so he appointed trusted regents to govern in his absence. Essentially, Canute's empire functioned as separate kingdoms loosely coordinated by one powerful king's directives. This is a fact that would become extremely problematic when that one king was no longer on the scene. To knit his domains closer, Canute did take steps toward integration. One notable policy was his use of England's advanced coinage and fiscal system to benefit Denmark. He introduced English-style coin minting in Denmark, hoping to modernize the Danish economy. Indeed, Canute's reign saw an attempt at a uniform currency type in both England and Denmark, which theoretically could have facilitated trade across the North Sea. However, the widespread use of coinage from the Holy Roman Empire in Scandinavia prevented this from fully taking hold. Still, the North Sea was briefly transformed into a Viking Mediterranean. Merchants could travel more safely between Canute's lands, ushering in a mini golden age of trade and prosperity. Canute was also able to play to the sensibilities of Christendom to show that he wasn't a syncretic northern barbarian who was secretly worshipping the old gods. Though Canute was Christian, the Anglo-Saxons knew that many of his men weren't, or practiced a form of Christianity that was heavily influenced by Norse paganism. However, he was a devout patron of the Church, which earned him acceptance by the formerly wary Christian Anglo-Saxon populace. In Scandinavia, he continued and accelerated the Christianization of Denmark and Norway, building churches and installing bishops, often English or friendly to English church interests. By favoring the church, Canute won the approval of the Pope and Christian rulers in Europe, something no pagan Viking warlord could have achieved. Notably, in 1027, Canute made a famous pilgrimage to Rome. There he attended the coronation of Holy Roman Emperor Conrad II and achieved diplomatic triumphs. He secured lower tolls for travelers from his realms and forged an alliance with the empire. It's important to remember that this is the period of time where the Holy Roman Empire was the dominant force in Western Europe, not the decrepit entity it would later become. Conrad II even treated Canute as an equal at the imperial coronation, letting Canute stand beside him in the procession, a mark of great honor for the northern king. Canute's daughter was married to Conrad's son, the future Emperor Henry III, linking the North Sea royal house with the Holy Roman Empire's dynasty. These actions gave Canute's rule a legitimacy and prestige that went beyond brute force. He was accepted as a fellow Christian monarch in the club of European kings. For a Viking who began as a conquering invader, that was a remarkable transformation. He had brought peace and a measure of unity to territories that had known generations of conflict. However, the entire structure of the North Sea Empire rested on Canute's shoulders alone, and in 1035, that foundation was removed. When King Canute died in November 1035, the North Sea Empire collapsed with startling speed. The underlying weakness of a personal union became immediately apparent. There was no single imperial bureaucracy or unifying constitution to hold these kingdoms together beyond the person of Canute himself. Canute had intended for his realms to stay in his family, but he left an awkward succession. His sons Harthacanute and Harold Harefoot ended up quarreling over the spoils. After the dust settled, England was ruled by Harold Harefoot, Denmark remained with Harthacanute, and Norway went its own way. Harold Harefoot died in 1040, allowing Harthacanute to finally unite England and Denmark again, a brief echo of his father's union. But Harthacanute's reign in England was short and troubled. He gained a reputation for harsh rule, and he died in 1042 with no heir, and with him, Canute's dynasty ended. The English crown reverted to the native Anglo-Saxon royal line, with Edward the Confessor becoming king. The Danes ended up choosing a local prince to become king, and Norway continued on its own path as an independent kingdom. Thus, within less than a decade of Canute's passing, the North Sea Empire had disintegrated completely. The vision of a lasting Anglo-Scandinavian imperial state died with its architect. Historians often emphasize how ephemeral Canute's empire was, essentially held together from 1016 to 1035. The speed of its collapse underscores that it was never an integrated empire in the structural sense. There was no succession plan that could keep England, Denmark, and Norway united once different heirs vied for each. In short, Canute's empire was a one-man creation, and one man's passing unraveled it all in spectacular fashion. All this brings us back to the core question. Was the North Sea Empire really an empire? Modern historians are somewhat divided in terminology, but generally converge on a consensus. Canute's North Sea realm is best understood as a personal union of three kingdoms, rather than a unitary empire. The term North Sea Empire is convenient shorthand, but it can be misleading. Canute never took the title of emperor, nor did he create a new imperial administrative framework that merged his kingdoms. Each of Canute's kingdoms remained virtually entirely distinct. The scholarly consensus emphasizes that politically and structurally, Canute's realm lacked the hallmarks of a true empire. There was no single imperial capital or bureaucracy uniting England, Denmark, and Norway. Canute ruled each according to its own customs, traveling between them as needed. The unity was personified in Canute, and didn't extend much beyond his court and army. Furthermore, the transient nature of the union is often cited as evidence that this was a temporary personal conglomeration, not a durable imperial system. That said, modern historians do acknowledge the impressive scope and influence of Canute's rule. While they might hesitate to use empire without caveats, they recognize that for a generation, one man managed to wield sovereignty from England to the edge of the Arctic Circle. In that sense, Canute's North Sea dominion was imperial in ambition, if not in formal structure. Some have drawn parallels to the later so-called Angevin Empire of the 12th century, the vast territories of England and western France under the Plantagenet kings. Like Canute's empire, the Angevin Empire was a collection of individual domains united by a monarch. In the final calculation, whether we call it an empire or not, Canute the Great's North Sea dominion was extraordinary for its time. It represented the peak of Viking Age political power. It was a moment when a Scandinavian ruler sat on the throne of England and dominated Scandinavia, forging a vast maritime kingdom linked by the North Sea. In the end, the North Sea Empire was an empire in ambition and geographic sweep, but not an empire in durability or administrative unity.